You're listening to the Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast. Today's episode is about bearing fruit in difficult soil, maintaining your God given identity with challenging in laws. Are you a Catholic wife grappling with challenging in laws? The Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast is your sanctuary for navigating these sometimes stormy seas of life with toxic in laws, while being validated for what you've experienced. Join me, your host, Miriam Susan, a Catholic wife who's weathered nearly 3 decades of in-law drama, as we tackle the tough issues you're dealing with head on. Hi, Miriam Susan here, the host of this Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast, and I want to welcome you to today's episode. Today, we're going to be dipping into the fruits of the Spirit and talking about how those apply when you're dealing with your challenging or toxic in-laws. So let's go ahead and open with the scripture. And this is from Galatians 5, verses 22 and 23 from the New Revised Standard Version, Catholic Edition. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Now, I want to begin this episode by reminding us all that these fruits are not just about our relationship with others, but about using them and cultivating them as a way to honor our authentic selves as children created by God. So let's begin by talking about our God-given identity. So in Genesis chapter 1, we are told that we are created in God's image. This is really important. God created us. God wants us to exist, not as clones of anybody else, even if we're identical twins. We are chosen to be here by God because of the uniqueness of us, the uniqueness of what we have inside of us, the uniqueness of what we can share and give to the greater world around us, whether it is our family, our parish, our neighborhood, the world. We were created for a specific reason, and we should be ready and willing and able to live out those fruits and that uniqueness that God has given to us. There is I don't know if I would say danger, but there is a bit of a danger in diminishing our God-given gifts and our personality. If we try to conform to what somebody else wants us to be, if we try to downplay who we are, then that is kind of like saying, you know what, God, I know that you created me uniquely, but I think I know better. I think I know better the kind of person that I should be and not the person you created me to be. Now, of course, there's a lot of nuances with how we interpret who we are, and I'm not really going to get into that. But we need to keep in mind that God did give us certain gifts. He gave us our unique personality. He gave us our unique style of living in this world so that we can express it in a way that glorifies and honors Him. Because that's our purpose. That should be our main purpose in life, is to bring glory and honor to God so that hopefully someday we can spend eternity with Him. Shrinking and diminishing who we are can prevent us from fulfilling our Christian calling. How many people do you know that for the first half of their life said, I'm just going to do what mom and dad want me to do. This is what's going to make them happy. I need to make them happy. And then they realize halfway through their life that that's not what they were called to do. They were trying to mold themselves into what their parents' desires were. And it could have been something perfectly benign. Maybe the parents thought that the child was bent in a certain way, but really it was just the child mirroring what he or she thought the parents wanted. And then it isn't till later on in life that that child, who's now an adult, can fully express who God created them to be. So we need to be very careful about changing how we are to fit somebody else's idea of who we should be. We also need to remember that Jesus is our perfect model. He maintained his identity as Son of God, fully man, even when he was faced with the most intense opposition. When he knew he was going to be crucified, he did not back down. He remained true to who he was. So we can use that as a model for ourselves when we feel like it is just too difficult to be who we are, to be who we know God is calling us to be. We can look to the cross and know that Jesus never wavered. He knew what his mission was in life, and he fulfilled it perfectly. Let's think about some ways that we will be faced, or we have been faced, with difficult situations with our in-laws, and how the fruits of the Spirit can help us to know how to respond differently, to help us to respond in a way that honors Christ. So the first one is the fruit of love. Now, there are different kinds of love in a toxic relationship, whether it's with your husband and his parents, or you and somebody in your family, or perhaps in a workplace, a neighbor, whatever. There are different kinds of love depending on who is defining it. There is an enabling love that is not really, I would say, not truly love, because love should desire the good of the other person. And if we are enabling someone, we are, in a way, encouraging them in some behaviors that are not exactly healthy. So we need to be careful that when maybe somebody tells us, oh, you need to just love them, you need to act in love. Well, we need to think sometimes love is difficult. Sometimes love has boundaries. A lot of times, love has boundaries, and boundaries can be an act of love for everybody involved. So we need to be very careful when we hear maybe extended family, maybe some flying monkeys from our husband's side of the family, or maybe even your family who don't see your in-laws in the same light that you do because they haven't been the subject of their wrath or their rage or their gossip or their manipulation. We have to be careful when they say, you need to love them. Christians are supposed to love. The Catholic Church teaches that you should love one another. That is true, but their definition of love might not be the definition that the scriptures are talking about. The second fruit of the Spirit I want to touch on is the fruit of peace. Now, peace, it's not a passive acceptance of things that are going on. Peace is usually an active choice that we have to make. Sometimes one of the ways that we can give and receive peace is through distance. It's through putting some space between you and your in-laws. That is the way we've had to do it with my in-laws. We have had to put some serious physical and communication distances in place with my in-laws, because being around them, being in communication with them, was stealing our peace. And when you're married, when you have a family, the peace of that marriage and family has to come before the relationship with parents. For reference, I encourage you to go back to episode 36 to learn about the proper order of a Catholic family and understand that your relationship with God comes first. Your relationship with your spouse comes second. And the relationship with children, if you have any, comes third. And then after that comes anybody else. And so if somebody is telling you you need to love somebody and just make peace with your in-laws, sometimes if they don't know the full story, they're kind of telling you to just be quiet and suck it up and just go with the flow. But that's like pseudo peace. That's faux peace. That's not true, authentic peace. There is a difference between peacemaking and peacekeeping. Peacemaking means you are taking an active role. It means you are doing things with intention to create a sense of peace. Peacekeeping is more like, well, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to ruffle feathers. So I'm just going to shut my mouth, sit back, and stew, because usually there's a reason why you're not standing up, because you'll probably have an explosive or very unreceptive reaction to speaking up. But all that does is it encourages the other person to keep acting in a way that is unacceptable to you, and it really squashes who you are. It squashes your independent self. It squashes your autonomy as an individual to say, you know what, I don't find this behavior acceptable and I need it to stop. The third fruit of the Spirit, which is one that many of us struggle with just in general, is self control. It is really hard to get to the point where you can exercise self control without thinking, because it's so hard, because it's a denial of our sinful desires to do things. We need to think about when we are exercising our self control, there's a difference between responding to the toxic actions of your in laws versus reacting. Reacting is more knee jerk. Reacting is more just spur of the moment. I'm going to say something back, versus responding is more like, okay, I need to take a step back, probably take a deep breath, think about what I'm going to say or do, and then respond. Self control also is a way to find strength, because there is a lot of strength that is required to exercise restraint. Think about, I don't know if you've seen those experiments that were done years and years ago on little kids, where they are left in a room with some candy on the table, and they are told by the people conducting the experiment that if they are good, in a little while they can have a piece of candy or a cupcake or whatever it was, a cookie. And then the person who is conducting the experiment leaves the room. But there's a camera on the child, and the child doesn't know there's a camera. And just seeing the struggle that the children have in trying to do what they know they're supposed to do, not touch the candy, not touch the cupcake, not eat it or whatever, while the adult is gone, is it's kind of amusing, but it's very telling too, because it does take a lot of strength to have that restraint, to not do what you really, really want to do, whether it's eat a cookie or snap back at your mother-in-law. That takes a lot of strength. So that is a way to exercise and get better at that fruit of the Spirit of self-control, is to exercise restraint. Now, self-control honors God. How do we know this? Because it's one of the fruits of the Spirit. And it wouldn't be a fruit if it didn't bring honor to God. But it also honors our authentic selves. We don't want to be carried by our impulses, right? We are human beings. We are not animals that respond and live just by instinct. We have the ability to reason. We have the ability to exercise restraint and self control. So, using self control in situations with your in laws, it is a wonderful tool to honor God again and honor who we are at our core, who God sees us to be, by taking that step back, taking that deep breath, being measured with what we say and do in reactions to what our in laws do, and taking that time to respond instead of react, taking that time to exercise restraint. And again, this is a way that we can use this fruit of the Spirit to honor God, and it actually honors our in laws. When we don't snap back, when we don't react in a knee jerk way, that is a way to honor them as fellow human beings, as the parents of our spouse. Hi, Miriam Susan here. I wanted to point out a new feature for you to reach out with any questions that you might have. It is an audio message submission option on my website, desiringpeace.com/ podcast. If you have any questions, if you just want to reach out, if you just want to tell me, hey, thank you, I really appreciated this episode, I would absolutely love to hear from you. If you decide to submit a question, it could be chosen to be played here on the podcast or for me to just answer it if it makes more sense for me to just address your question without playing your audio. But I will be in touch if you reach out. Just send me a quick note. Go to desiringpeace.com/podcast. Submit your audio message now. So you may be thinking, well, all this theory is good. That's fine. But how does this actually play out in real life? So I wanted to give you some examples of how choosing the fruits of the Spirit can look in your relationship and your dealings with your toxic in laws. So the first one is choosing love over resentment. So the example might be that your mother in law is constantly critical of your parenting choices. Now, a normal response for a non Christian would be to react, to bicker and fight with her, to argue with her. But the loving response is to say something like, well, mother in law, we have carefully considered what works best for our family, and that's what we're going to do. Another way to exercise love is to pray when you are triggered. You might be in prayer the whole time you're around your in laws, but that is one way to lovingly deal with the situation. Also, choose to see your in law's criticism as possibly coming from their own sense of insecurity. Maybe your mother in law was not a very confident mom. Maybe she had a lot of insecurities and maybe she did a lot of reading and now it's all coming out on you. Keep that in mind. Now, that doesn't mean it's an excuse for why she's acting like this, but it's just an opportunity for you to just take a step back and say, okay, maybe this is not about me. And a lot of times, really not. We just happen to be in that role that gets her attention or gets his attention. But to think about it that way, that maybe it's not just about me, it's just about her insecurity. And then another way to maintain a sense of love is to maintain firm but kind boundaries about your parenting decisions. Again, saying something like, my husband and I have talked about this, and this is what we're choosing to do with this child. And that should be enough. But again, we're talking about toxic people. Chances are it won't be enough. Hopefully, your husband is on your side and you can face this together. But that is a way to approach a tough situation like that with Christian love and demonstrate that to your in laws. The second example, so the second fruit I want to talk about is choosing peace over chaos. The situation might be something like your in laws showing up unannounced and demanding immediate attention. We've had that happen where we've had an unexpected drop by and we had to, well, actually, you know what? We did not have to drop all our plans. We didn't, but we were not as strong in our boundaries at that point, strong in our identity. My husband was not yet at the point where he could or he felt comfortable standing up to his parents. There are times like that where people will show up and it seems like your whole world is just thrown into chaos because you're expected to drop everything and do whatever they want, entertain them because they're present. So, a way to embrace a sense of peace in a situation like that is to take a deep breath, say a quick prayer, and respond to your in laws saying something like, we'd really love to see you, but only say that if it's true. We'd really love to see you, but we need some advance notice to be ready to host you at the house. We need some advance notice to plan for a meal together. We need some advance notice so that we can make sure the kids are done with their schoolwork before you come over. That's a way to respond in a way that hopefully brings peace. Now, another way to focus on peace over chaos is to maintain your family's already existing schedule and offer some alternative times. So if your in-laws show up, and let's say it's been a long day, the kids are grumpy because maybe dinner isn't ready when it would normally would be because of things that have been going on, and your in-laws show up. And you can say something like, now is just really not a good time. Do you think you could come back tomorrow or whatever other day might work better for you? Hopefully they would understand. Again, I know toxic in-laws they don't get the memo sometimes when it comes to seeing that we're trying to work with them. We're trying to keep this peaceful, but at least with all of these examples, at least you know that you are doing your part. You are doing the best that you can to work with a very challenging and triggering situation. And lastly, another way that you can really choose peace is by staying calm while you enforce previously communicated boundaries. So if your in laws have made a habit of just dropping by unannounced and throwing your whole day into a tailspin, you can say, yeah, we've talked about this before. We really need you to let us know before you come by. This is not going to work out for us today. And then you have a sense of peace knowing that you and your husband communicated things as peacefully, as lovingly as possible, no matter what their reaction is. That's the thing about peace, is that it's internal. It doesn't matter what everybody else is doing around you. You can choose to search and seek out peace no matter what is going on around. So even if your in-laws totally blow up, and I understand how triggering that can be, you can still have a sense of peace knowing you didn't do anything wrong. You're just reinforcing a boundary that they already knew about that they chose to disregard. And now they are suffering the consequences of you holding firm to that boundary. Let's talk about self control again. Let's talk about maybe your sister in law spreading lies or slander to the extended family about you. The natural instinctual response is to lash out, try to defend yourself. But I will tell you, with toxic people, that usually does not work. Partly because for some reason it seems like toxic people just have an unending supply of energy and time devoted to slander and lies and manipulations and deceit, if that's their form of toxicity. So, a way to react to that by embracing the fruit of self control is to continue to act with a sense of integrity without defending yourself to every single person that she talks to. You can respond to direct questions from people with simple and truthful answers and focus your energy on maintaining a healthy relationship with those family members who are respectful, who are willing to hear your side of the story. It's the ones that don't, that only listen to one side of the story, that it's really pointless to argue with them because that toxic person has their ear and that toxic person has right where they want them. And it's really, really hard to combat that with a simple conversation here and there. And one of the simplest, but not easiest way to exercise a sense of self-control with situations like this is to pray for those people who are misrepresenting you, spreading lies, slandering your name, gossiping about you. That is a very simple thing to do, again, but it's very hard to genuinely pray that and do it in such a way that honors God. Now, the next fruit I want to talk about is gentleness over harshness. The example I'd like to share is maybe your father in law making dismissive comments about your career or your education. The way to respond with a sense of gentleness is with some confident humility. I'm really grateful for the opportunities that God has given me, and that's it. You don't have to justify your career. You don't have to justify your education to your father in law. You really don't. And if you don't try to justify, it will oftentimes take the steam out of his argument. It'll take the sting that he wants to inflict out of the whole conversation. You can maintain your professional pursuits or not if you choose to stay at home with your children. You can do that without seeking his approval because you don't need his approval. You can set an example for your whole family, especially for your children if you have them, of supporting other people's achievements and their careers, whether you necessarily agree with them or not. Obviously, if we're talking about illegal careers like drug dealing, obviously not something that you're going to be supportive of. But generally speaking, you can be supportive of somebody. Let's say you have a nephew who doesn't want to go to college. He wants to go to trade school to become a welder. Applaud him. Tell him you think that's a great idea. And do the same thing for a niece who decides that she wants to go to law school and become a lawyer. It's their choice. Encourage them in whatever career they seek out. Don't treat them as your father-in-law might be treating you about your career or your education. Also, you can try to show an interest in your father-in-law's perspective, but not internalize his judgment. Maybe there is a grain of truth to what he's saying. And you can let him know that, maybe you did want to go on and further your career, but children entered the picture and you felt God calling you to stay home. You can listen to his perspective with respect, but don't take anything personally that he says about maybe people who went ahead and kept working after they had children. If that's not where God called you to be, so be it. Now, the last fruit of the Spirit I'll talk about is choosing joy over bitterness. This is really, really hard when you are being excluded from family traditions, family events, or decision making in the family. How you respond to this would be number one, create your own meaningful traditions within your immediate family. If your husband's extended family is excluding you from an annual Christmas tradition that he has participated ever since he was little, but now that he's married, he's not welcome because of you. First of all, it's not really because of you. It's because y'all are not bowing down to the demands of his parents. So make your own traditions. Start something new. Find joy in building healthy relationships where they exist. You have, very likely, some good, healthy relationships in your life. Don't dwell on the stressful, negative, bitter relationships that exist in your life. Focus on the ones that bring you joy. Celebrate other people's happiness without requiring participation in every single event. If your sister-in-law is having her son baptized and y'all weren't invited, just rejoice that she's having that child baptized. Pray for the child. Pray for them and have a sense of joy that, praise God, they are baptizing this child into the church. That's a wonderful thing to do. And then finally, you can choose to maintain a grateful heart for the blessings that you have. We all have blessings. Sometimes it seems like we have to dig and we have to go through a lot of muck before we can find it. But we do all have blessings. And when things are really hard, sometimes that's a very appropriate thing to do, is to take stock of the blessings that God has given us so that we can get our focus off of the bitterness that we can nurture, unfortunately, and grow by being angry at our in-laws. I want to close out the podcast by bringing up some points that I want to make sure that you walk away from this episode knowing. The first is that being gentle does not mean being weak. We can exercise the spirit, the fruit of the Spirit of gentleness, and be strong. We can be gentle and we can be strong. We can also choose peace over conflict, and that is an act of courage. It takes a whole lot more courage to respond with the fruit of peace than it is by being contentious, by being angry, by being explosive. It's a lot more courageous to take the peaceful route. Another point is that maintaining boundaries is completely different than building walls. Building walls is shutting people out. But boundaries is basically saying, this is where I end and you begin. That's really the basic premise of boundaries. This is what is acceptable for me. This is what is acceptable for my family. Anything outside of that is not acceptable, and that's on you. So it's very important to know that your family, your extended family might say, that you are building walls, when really all you're doing is setting boundaries and sticking to them. They see them as walls because it's preventing them from having the control and influence that they want to have over your life that is not their control to assume. And then finally, know that your uniqueness is part of God's design. That is how He designed you to be. If you have ADHD, that's part of God's design. If you are a different race than your husband's family would like you to be, guess what? That's part of God's design. God designed it that way. If you are more academic, that's part of God's design. All of these things that your in-laws could use as reasons why you're an unfit spouse for your husband, it doesn't matter. Embrace them as how God created you. You are uniquely created to bring glory to God in some unique way. And we need to always remember that when our in-laws try to manipulate, control, squash who we are, they're going against how God created you. Keep that in mind. Now, that doesn't mean that we should indulge in sinful desires. No, of course not. That's where we get to exercise the fruit of self-control. We all have sinful desires. We all have sinful things that we need to keep in check. And that's where we get to use our self-control. But God created us all uniquely. We're fearfully and wonderfully made. And if somebody is trying to force you to be something that you're not, as long as it doesn't fall into the category of sin in your actions, then they're not right. If they're trying to force you to be someone that you're not, and you're not trying to act out in sin, that other person is misguided. There's a few things that I would love for you to take away from this podcast is I want you to remember that reinforcing and maintaining healthy boundaries reflects a level of spiritual maturity. I also want you to remember that Jesus himself sometimes withdrew and acted in ways that didn't make sense to his disciples because of certain situations. When the crowd got too big, he went to the mountains. When there were too many people on the shore, he got in a boat and preached to them from the waters. Jesus had his own boundaries, and we can too. Through these situations, through these difficult relationships that we are facing with our in-laws, we have a choice. We can choose to react. We can choose to be nasty and mean, to cultivate a sense of bitterness, or we can choose to pray. We can choose to seek out wisdom and strength from our faith, from the scriptures, from church tradition, from those who are wise, professionals, priests. Those are the things that we can choose to focus on. And in that way, we can choose to focus on cultivating the fruits of the Spirit. And in that way, grow and become more like who God desires us to be. God bless you this week. I pray that your year is going well, that your family drama is lessening, although realistically that might not be happening. But remember that I am praying for you. Please feel free to reach out to me at hello@desiringpeace.com. Leave me a voice message on my website by going to desiringpeace.com/podcast. Send me a voice message. I would love to hear from you. And I pray that you would always remember that the Holy Spirit is with us and he wants to strengthen us in every way possible, even through these difficult relationships with our toxic in-laws. Go in peace. Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. If you've ever wondered just how toxic your relationship with your in-laws really is, I've got the perfect tool for you. Introducing the new free Toxic In-Laws Assessment, a self-graded quiz designed to help you identify the true level of toxicity in your relationship with your in-laws. Whether you're unsure if your in-laws are really that bad or you think they might be worse than you realize, this assessment will give you the clarity you need. Don't leave it to guesswork. Take the free Toxic In-Laws Assessment now and start your journey towards healthier and more peaceful family dynamics. Visit desiringpeace.com/quiz to get started. Disclaimer. All content and information on this podcast and our website, including our programs, products, and/or services, is for information and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional medical, psychiatric, or mental health advice of any kind, and does not establish any kind of professional client relationship by your listening to this podcast or use of my website. A professional client relationship with you is only formed after we have expressly entered into a written agreement with you that you have signed, including our fee structure and other terms to work with you in a specific matter. Although we strive to provide accurate general information, the information presented here is not a substitute for any kind of professional advice, and you should not rely solely on this information. Always consult a professional in the area for your particular needs and circumstances prior to making any professional, medical, or mental health related decisions.